All right, so let's grab some music for our scenes, and then we'll get some hit points and things like that. The issue was I put the assignment up at the end of class last time, but I put it up in my 537 class. So I had these grad students messaging me wanting to know, like, and most of them are Indian, Pakistani, and so they're, you know, most of it's like data structure stuff, and all of a sudden just this random thing about Nora. And a student messaged me, it's like, can you please explain the details of this assignment? I must have missed something from this or something like that. It's pretty funny. So I put up the right assignment now, and I made it due like tomorrow by midnight, so the files that you have just get uploaded whenever. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I thought you put it up, and then I went to submit it, and I'm like, I can't find it.
Yeah, I specifically put it up at the end of class so I wouldn't forget about putting it up. Like, that was the specific reason for putting it up then. What is that? What's the saying? No good deed goes unpunished or something like that. All right. So actually what I'm grabbing here is the original Final Fantasy music. So I have kind of a main theme thing. That's going to be when we're kind of dancing around, you know, like walking around town before we go in. Then I have our battle scene. So this is what it'll sound like when we're just walking around before we're in a battle. Very exciting. And battle scene will start off like this. Let's see. So we need a victory. So when we win a battle, because we'll be able to do that today. Exciting. All right. So that's us winning a battle. And then, isn't there a death? Dead music. Perfect. Now we just need to find a Nora scream, kind of put at the same time. So, it's like, oh no! All right, so those should be good enough for us. Just those two things, or those four things for our game. So let's go ahead and get Nora moving back and forth. And then actually, before we make Nora specifically attack, we need to give Nora some stats, like hit points. And I assume we're going to probably, if we're sticking with your traditional fantasy game, we're going to be using probably mana or magic points to, I guess, tase. So that's what Nora does. Something. So we'll have to give her some abilities that so when she gets hit and stuff, she has some way of sort of kind of dying. And at the same time, the enemies need to have these same kind of stats. So we need to have a data structure type representation for our bad guys and our good guys, so that their status can change throughout the game. Love this scene. Oh yeah, it's my favorite. All right, so let's go back to our main scene here and get that music inserted. So right now it's all completely quiet, right? All right, so we want to get some stuff put in there. So what we'll do is, here's our scene stuff when we were trying to hide things in there. We can go ahead and probably attach the music to Nora specifically. So we need to bring our assets in, and we already have some sounds. So we'll go ahead and import new asset, and I'm hoping we can play OGG files. Okay, here is the main theme. Big money. Okay, seems to know that that's an audio file. So we will drop this on Nora. Oh. Actually, now it's just in the scene. It's actually probably okay, but it wasn't my intent. Let me remove it from the scene here. We'll go back to Nora. Let's add an audio component to Nora, and then we'll drop that in there. Or audio, was it audio source? And then we need to attach the audio clip to that. And it's this one. Okay, and we'll have play on awake, and we'll have loop, so it keeps going. So let's make sure that that's happening now. Oh yeah! This is so good. Remember that music, Gabe? Yeah, it was the original Final Fantasy music. I stole it, I think. I don't know if it's even... the ROMs for the games are legal to use now, because the licensing has fallen off or whatever. But I wonder what the rules are with the composed music. Does that come with the game, or is that, I don't know. Do not redistribute. That's my catch-all. Okay, so now when we're in our second scene, let's get our main our fight scene going, and we'll go ahead and have the sound attached to access is denied. Let me try again. There we go. We'll have our sound attached to Nora, because we probably want to alter this sound, because like during the fight we're going to have the normal fight music playing, but then when Nora either wins or dies, we want to switch that. So we'll change what the audio source is going to play. So let's add a audio source to Nora here, and then we'll go ahead and bring in our fight sound, and I'm just bringing in one sound at a time. Okay, here's the battle sound. All right, click on Nora again, and let's add the, is that battle? Yeah, it's the battle one. So we'll add this to Nora's audio clip, and we'll loop that as well. Make sure that guy does its thing. Oh yeah! Oh yeah! All right, perfect. All right, so now we can turn the volume down. How do I turn the volume down on this thing? I still want to hear it to keep morale up. I would have assumed it would be a volume button there. I guess I got to do it on here. Oh yeah! That'll keep us excited. That'll be good. All right. So If we go back to, and I think they actually had pictures of it up top here, so we can use it as a reference. So notice over here, so here's like the fight scene. I click on this and it'll make it larger. Oh, perfect. I can do that. Okay, so this is kind of what our fight scene looks like. For us, we just have two options. We have, melee or tase, or ninja or tase. But notice over here, there's some stats associated with each player. So we only have one player. We only have our Nora person here. And in this game, they only have hit points. I thought that they had some other stuff than that. I thought they had magic points and things like that. Well, we're going to give ourselves a couple of stats because we want certain things to be able to be available and not available. So we're going to have hit points. This is usually your amount of life you have. So when these guys hit you, your hit points go down. Similarly, bad guys will have hit points as well. We're going to also have magic points that we use for tasing. That's like our magic spell, if you will. So whenever we want to cast that spell, it takes some of our magical energy. So if we get too low on our magical energy, we aren't able to tase anymore. So then the gameplay would have been that if we were too low to cast magic, we would drink a potion. That would be our move that turn to bring our magical strength back up. So we have these resources that we're going to be using while we're playing our game, and this is something that goes through most video games. So we need to have this kind of thing, but we need to have it associated with Nora. But at the same time, we want to think about this from the perspective of our monsters. This guy might have magical abilities. He might have melee, ninja abilities, whatever. And he's certainly going to be able to be killable if we want to be able to potentially win the fight. So these guys also need to have those hit points, the magic points, that kind of stuff. So we need something that's going to kind of govern the information about our current players and that kind of stuff. So this is probably going to be a C# class, plain Jane, not a mono behavior, just a class that's going to hold some of this information so that we can build a new monster, if you will, or give Nora her initial stats. And then also let Nora level up where she gets higher hit points and that kind of stuff. And those things then become part of what Nora or the monsters reference when the game is playing. All right, so let's go and add something along those lines. So we'll go back to our assets here, and we'll go to our scripts. And we're going to go ahead and create a C# script, and let's call this let's call it NPC Stats. NPC stands for non-player character. That's kind of a gaming thing. So we might want to separate our stats, Nora's stats, maybe she can keep track of those in her own behavior, from like the stats of our monsters. Okay, so NPC Stats is going to be our script that's going to keep track of that stuff. So we'll go ahead and double click on this. Okay, so the very first thing we're going to do is I'm going to remove mono behavior from this because I do not want it to call update and all that other stuff and take up system resources. So this guy's not going to be a mono behavior. He's going to be a plain Jane C# class, which means I'll also not have a start function. I'll also not have an update function. Let's see, C#, is it constructors init or the same name as the class? C# constructor. Same name as a class, just like Java. Okay, so this is going to be a public NPC Stats, and probably a bad class name by naming convention standards because it starts with a lowercase letter, but we're going to roll with it. And before I put some stats in here, I'm going to go ahead and just do my opening and closing. So we're going to have some variables that we want to keep track of for an NPC. So for instance, this is going to be the stats for our Kool-Aid Man. All right, he's going to have some hit points and some magic points and that kind of stuff. Okay, so we'll have a public int HP, number of hit points he has. We'll have a public int MP for magic points. And then anything else that we talked about this before. We're going to leave it in there for now. We're going to say public int initiative. And this might be something that we use to determine who goes first in a fight. Initially, we're not going to put it in there, so this is almost a reminder for us that we might want to add initiative later. So that when a fight first starts, we kind of figure out who goes first. Do we get to go first, or does the enemy attack us first? And depending on that, we could maybe that happens through initiative, or initiative gives us a bonus or hurts us in that case. All right, so when we build an NPC stat, we'll take in hit points, we'll take in magic points, we'll set our hit points equal to the hit points that were passed in, we'll set our magic points equal to the magic points that were passed in, and these guys are private. I meant to make them private, but I made them public. So these guys are all private members. So we need to be able to modify these guys. Let's see, does Visual Studio have a generate getter setters? Probably does. Is it an insert snippet? Whatever. I don't know how to get to the generate getters and setters in this, so we'll just write it. So we're going to say public int get HP, and this guy will return this.hp. We'll have public int get MP. This guy will return this.mp. We'll have a public. Now for right now, I'm going to say void, but we might change this. So the first two here are our getters. Get those private members for our hit points and our magic points. This guy's going to be a setter. So we're going to say set HP. Now the reality is we're probably not going to be directly setting the hit points of something. Instead, we're going to be reducing hit points. So Kool-Aid Man, gets hit by the taser, takes some amount of damage, and that comes in here. So maybe we call this guy reduce HP. And this is going to take in an integer amount. All right, and what we'll do is we'll say this dot HP minus equals amount. So we will reduce our hit points by that amount. Similarly, public void reduce MP int amount. This dot MP minus equals amount. Okay. Now we probably also want to have a kind of a function that allows us to ask this NPC, are you dead? Okay. So we're going to have a public Boolean is dead. And this guy should return true if if he's dead, which means that his hit points are 0 or less. So return this dot HP less than or equal to 0. That means he's dead. public boolean, and it's bool in this language, right? Bool. Okay, so that's going to be our NPC stats dealio. Now we're going to keep things relatively simple to begin with because we've kind of seen that some scenes have multiple enemies, right? So you might have to have an array of NPC stats associated with your enemies. In this case, we don't really have that problem. We have just Nora versus Kool-Aid Man. So let's just hard code those two people in there for right now, just so we can use our data structure. Now in this scene, we do not have, I think if I look at core, let's just open up core here. So that's the scene 1 container. We could certainly use core to handle our fight rather than having a second core. And another thing that would be beneficial for our core would be keeping track of Nora's stats potentially. Or we could have Nora hold her own stats. So maybe what we do inside of core is we have a game object, or not a game object. We have a data structure for our NPC stats for our current enemy. And this is assuming that we're always fighting one enemy. So probably need to expand to an array if we're fighting more than one enemy. So we'll have a public static current enemy stats. All right, and this guy will start off as null, and its type is going to be NPC stats. All right, so we have a variable capable of holding the NPC stats of a enemy. All right, and initially it's null. And null means that we're not currently fighting an enemy. So as soon as we start fighting an enemy, I wonder why that's taking so long to cook. Okay, as soon as we start fighting an enemy, we need to generate those stats for Kool-Aid Man and, in our case, Kool-Aid Man. All right, so we're going to go ahead and go into our scene here. And we're in our fight scene. All right, and here is our Kool-Aid Man, and our Kool-Aid Man has a script attached to it called enemy. So one thing we can do is when the enemy is comes alive, we can make a couple of different things here. We can rely on the on core to handle this, or we can have each enemy hold on to his own stats. That actually might be the better choice, rather than have this guy up here manage stats for all our enemies. If we have our enemy script handle that information, so if we come in here and just get rid of this, we're not going to actually store the stats in core. We'll have each enemy. I forgot we had our enemy script. We'll have each enemy just keep track of their own stats. So when an enemy first comes into existence, open up this script for enemy. An enemy is going to keep track of an NPC stats variable up here. So NPC stats, call this guy my stats. So this is going to be the stats associated with this particular enemy. So that means every single game object that has a enemy script associated with it will get its own version of NPC stats. Okay, notice this guy is not static like we had it inside of core. So inside of start, we'll go ahead and give this guy an initial stats. Now, maybe in the game, there could be some range for maybe not all Kool-Aid men are created equal. Because when you're out in the wild, you see Kool-Aid men kind of crawling around. Some are bigger Kool-Aid men, some are smaller Kool-Aid. You know what I mean, right? You got this. But for right now, we'll hard code. They're all going to have the same strength and that kind of stuff. All right, so we're going to say this dot my stats is going to be equal to a new NPC stats, and we need to pass this guy hit points and magic points. So we're going to say that Kool-Aid men start off with 10 hit points, and let's say 5 magic points. Okay. Kool-Aid Man's more of a gun toter. In fact, we might even say he has 0 magic points. He doesn't get to do magic. He's a gun shooter guy. Unless we treat his gun as magic. So he can shoot the gun, and that's like a magic thing. Or he can come up and do one of those, like they do in the movies, they'll like slam you in the face with like the butt of the gun. That's like a ninja move, right? Brendan, you're the expert on this. Isn't that the thing?
I think that sounds right.
That's a thing. That's a thing. Okay, well, so we'll use magic points for that. All right, so, well, no, 10, well, that's the melee attack. So we're going to say he's allowed to shoot the gun 3 times, assuming that it takes 1 magic point to shoot the gun. All right. Because that would be like his more powerful move, probably. You know, somebody comes up and smacks you in the face with the butt of a gun, broken nose or something like that. You get mowed down with bullets. It's worse. All right, so we're going to give him 10 hit points. That's how many attacks he can take. We're going to, for right now, everything is just 1 and 1. If you smack Kool-Aid Man, he takes 1 damage, something like that. So he can take 10 hits, and then he can delve out 3 machine gun bursts or something like that. So that's going to be the initial stats for Kool-Aid Man. Okay. Now, we probably want to have a way for Kool-Aid Man to somehow show us his current stats. Now, I actually don't think that Final Fantasy did this. I think it was always a mystery for how dead your enemy was. Do you remember for sure? You played the game, right? Yeah, see, I think as you're fighting these guys, you don't necessarily get an idea on how dead they are. I want to say, towards the end, they changed. They no longer looked healthy. They were kind of like all like hunched over, like you knew they were just about done, but you didn't know how much more it was going to take. So we can decide that we don't want to show that stuff, but at least for development, we probably want to show those numbers so we can make sure that they're going down. Or at the very least, we can write this to the console. We want to write it to the console so we can see the value going down. So once we get to the actual attacks, we can decide how we want to display it. But right now, an enemy is going to keep track of his stats, and if something bad happens to him, we're going to have those stats go down. Okay. So let's go and let's make Nora move initially, which was kind of the homework-y thing. So we're in this scene. Oh, yeah. All right, so whether we hit ninja or tase, once we hit enter, we already wrote that?
I wrote it before.
Oh, so what was the homework assignment for this week? Huh?
Move it back.
Oh, yeah. All right, so she steps forward. Oh, yeah. She should do her thing here, and then 2 seconds later, we want her to move back into her original position. So the listener for this is going to be Nora Fight, I'm assuming. Yeah, so here's the return. So we transform Nora's position to her fight position. Are we storing her original position?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we have Nora's idle position. And are we actually storing that? Yeah, it's that. So then we want to delay a couple of seconds. So how would you write that?
Mm-hmm.
Do an invoke with a delay. So we'll have void move back to idle. And this will say this dot transform dot position is equal to this dot idle, Nora idle position. All right, so that shifts her back. We might even say void move to attack and say this dot transform dot position is equal to this dot Nora Fight position. And then call these two functions rather than randomly just hard code in a line of code down at the bottom. All right, and these can be private functions. We're only going to call them from within here. All right, so down here, the first thing we'll do is we'll say this dot move to attack. Then we'll say invoke and I'm gonna back to idle and I'll put that in just so I spelled it right. So that's what we're going to invoke, and we're going to invoke it in 2 seconds. Okay. So let's go back in here, make sure that she steps forward, and 2 seconds later she steps back.
Oh yeah.
Okay, seems to be doing the stuff. Now, one thing we have right now is if I press enter on here and then I press enter again, it's going to be interesting. So when I press enter, I'm allowed to keep moving these keys. So the reality should be when I hit ninja and Nora steps forward, I shouldn't be able to keep interacting with this menu. It's in the middle of the attack mode or something like that, right? Okay, so how do we manage that? I want to kind of disable my ability to select an attack because I'm in the middle of an attack. How would you manage when Nora is allowed to make a choice there and when she's not? Keeping in mind that making a choice is going to mean responding to the up and down arrow keys as well as responding to the enter key. Those are two things that she shouldn't be responsive while she's in the middle of an attack. Good. Okay, and what would you ask? What kind of question would you ask in that if statement?
Well, you can like move the variable to jump to forward to say like this fight.
Okay.
Our fight. That's what happens.
So have some sort of flag that gives us indication whether we're in the middle of an attack or not, right? So like is attacking or something like that. So we'll go in here and we're in Nora Fight. So up top here, we'll have a private bool is attacking, and by default that's going to be false. She's not attacking. So now we only respond to the arrow keys or the enter key if we are not attacking. So we'll need to adapt our couple of if statements inside of update to make that work. So here in update, here's our up or down arrow. So if our up arrow or our down arrow is pressed and we're not currently attacking, we're going to do this stuff. So we'll surround this in parentheses. Then we'll say and not this dot is attacking. So if you press the down arrow or the up arrow and we're not currently attacking, then let the thing change its index. Similarly, we're only going to respond to the return key if... Now, one thing we could do here, and this might actually be more efficient. I'm going to move that portion of the and to the beginning. We're going to say, if we're not attacking and we have pressed the down key or the up key, why might this be more efficient than having the not attacking at the end?
Keys are pressed.
Yeah, so we're going to presume that this guy right here has some level of efficiency, some level of performance impact associated with it. So checking to see if a key was down must cost us something. And the way any of our modern languages work is if you're dealing with an and, it's only going to even do any of this logic over here if it passes this first test. So we're not even going to check for those key presses if this Boolean was in the wrong position, wrong state. Does that make sense? And we would presume that checking a Boolean is probably faster than checking whether a key was pressed. I think that's a fair bet. I don't know that to be the case 100%, but I think that that's a reasonable assumption. All right, so then we would do a pretty similar thing down here. So we're only going to even check if these keys are pressed if we're not attacking. We're only going to check if this key was pressed if we're not attacking. This should add some efficiency to those guys. We assume checking a Boolean is going to be pretty quick. It's not going to get much cleaner than that. All right, so now while Nora's in the middle of her thing, well, actually right now, nothing changes because we haven't actually flipped the thing that we are attacking. So if we are in this logic right here, right before we move to attack, we'll go ahead and say this dot is attacking is equal to true. So now we've marked ourselves as currently attacking, which should then disable the space key and the arrow keys. And then we need to make sure that when we're done attacking, when Nora actually goes and moves back at the end of those 2 seconds, we re-enable is attacking or re-disable is attacking. So I'm going to put a little comment here. Let's get this guy gone. So disable arrow and enter keys. And then we'll steal this line. And we could have actually said this dot is attacking is equal to not this dot is attacking. We want to just flip it back and forth, but this is more obvious. She is attacking. She is not attacking is going to be the other one. All right, so when we do move back to idle, now we are presuming here that move back to idle will only ever be used as the finishing position of an attack. If our game gets more complex and moving back into idle position is a thing, maybe an enemy has some sort of, I don't know, tornado spell or something like that that makes her, fly up into the air, disappear off the screen, and then we need to have her be able to get back into her original position. This might get a little more sketch, but it probably isn't necessarily going to hurt something to reset whether she's attacking. If she wasn't attacking before and she gets sucked up in a tornado and she's still not attacking. So we'll go ahead and after we move her back to her idle position, we'll set her, we're going to enable. Oh, that didn't go nearly as well as I expected. We're going to enable arrow and enter keys by setting is attacking to false. Make sense?
Oh yeah.
So right now, arrow keys are working. We'll go ahead and do ninja. Arrow keys are not working. Now they're working again. All right, so that seems to, this is almost akin to, if you remember from our platformer game, the double, triple, how you jump as much as you want type situation. When you jump and then you can just keep flying up because we were just adding force to a rigid body and we didn't have any way of flagging whether we were currently performing a jump. Okay, so we now have Nora moving back and forth. Now, during that 2-second period when she's supposed to be attacking, we need to actually have her do something. Now, a couple other things we need to add. Actually, we need to think about in a fight. So we're kind of talking about game mechanics from a fighting perspective. If two people are fighting, and let's forget about magic for a second, and let's just think about we're just throwing punches. Does every punch automatically land? Because if you're like quick and nimble like me, you can bob and weave. I'm not very quick and nimble, Brennan. So, more like take the fetal position and just go down. So if we probably have some sort of defense, right? If you're fighting against like a knight or something, and they're wearing, really heavy plate armor, well, you could probably, punch them and not much is going to happen, right? Because they're wearing armor. If somebody else is wearing, a silk tunic or something like that, then the punch is they're going to feel it. All right, so maybe our enemies as well as ourselves have a lot of times in games it's called an armor class, AC. So we'll come back in here. We'll go to our NPC stats, and we're going to add another stat here. Private int AC, that's our armor class. Okay, and we'll go ahead and we'll set the armor class in here as well. So we'll say int AC will come into the constructor. We'll say this dot AC is equal to AC. And then we'll give ourselves a getter for that guy. Public int get AC. This guy will return this dot AC. Now, in some games, there are definitely ways of adjusting your armor class. Maybe you take a potion that makes you tougher or something like that, gives you some sort of protection. And in that case, your armor class might go up. But in our world right now, things are simple where you start a fight with an armor class of 8. That's your armor class. Okay, you have an armor class of 8. Now, typically, the way games will work, I'll go ahead and ask the question, but I think I'm only going to have one, possibly 2 people who have heard of this. How many of you have ever heard of something called D20? All right, we got the 1. All right, so D20 is kind of a gaming standard. It also happens to represent a 20-sided die. You roll a 20-sided dice. But this guy is a gaming standard that happens to be used by the last several iterations of Dungeons & Dragons. So really a lot of these medieval games, really a lot of our modern games are actually based off of Dungeons & Dragons to varying degrees. So how many of you have heard of Dungeons & Dragons before? At least heard the name. How many of you have ever played the real Dungeons & Dragons, the tabletop? You're sitting around with all your geeky friends and you're rolling the dice and like, I can attack the darkness. You've seen that video, the Summoner Geeks? You might have been pretty young when it came out. Yeah, it actually would be appropriate for this. It would be appropriate for this thing. All right, so here's an example of tabletop role playing. Now, this was a game that came out years ago. I don't remember when it came out. You might have been pretty young. But in their promo video for this, they had the various players of the game and even the bad guy, the main enemy, all playing D&D with each other. Yeah, Stoner Geeks. Does it say when it came out? No, well, we'll just watch it.
Golf staff.
Oh, hold on.
You have entered the door to the north. You are now by yourself.
Gonna turn our sound back up. So this would be an example of something you would see in Dungeons and Dragons. You have a bunch of geeks sitting around a table, and they all have their little character sheets in front of them. All right, and their character sheet just shows them what their guy's name is, how many hit points they have, all the stats like we're doing right now. And they decide what they're going to do. It's a turn-based game, similar to Final Fantasy.
Golf staff. You have entered the door to the north. You are now by yourself, standing in a dark room. The pungent stench of mildew emanates from the wet dungeon walls.
Where are the Cheetos?
They're right next to you. I cast a spell.
Where's the Mountain Dew?
In the fridge. Duh. I want to cast a spell.
Can I have a Mountain Dew?
Yes, you can have.
You have to remind me at the very end. I'm going to have to pause it about 8 seconds early because there's something at the end that should be
Have a
on the
Mountain Dew.
recording.
Just go get it. I can cast any of these, right? On the list? Yes. Any of the first level ones.
I'm gonna get a soda. Anyone want one? Hey, Graham, I'm not in the room, right?
What room? I want to cast Magic Missile.
The room where he's casting all these spells from.
He hasn't cast anything yet. I am, though, if you'd listen. I'm casting Magic Missile. Why are you casting Magic Missile? There's nothing to attack here. I'm attacking the darkness. Fine. You attack the darkness. There's an elf in front of you. Whoa, that's me, right? He's wearing a brown tunic, and he has gray hair and blue eyes.
No, I don't. I have gray eyes.
Let me see that sheet.
Well, it says I have blue, but I decided I wanted gray eyes.
Whatever. Okay, you guys can talk to each other now if you want. Hello. I am Gallstaff, Sorcerer of Light.
Then how come you had to cast Magic Missile?
you guys are being attacked.
Do I see that happening?
No, you're outside by the tavern.
Will I get drunk?
There are 7 ogres surrounding you.
How could they surround us? I had Mordenkainen's magical watchdog cast.
No, you didn't.
I'm getting drunk. Are there any girls there?
I totally did. You asked me if I wanted any equipment before this adventure, and I said no. But I need material components for all my spells, so I cast Mordenkainen's faithful watchdog.
But you never actually cast it.
Roll the dice to see if I'm getting drunk.
Yeah, you are.
Are there any girls there?
Yeah, I did so. I completely said when you asked me.
No, you didn't. You didn't actually say that you were casting the spell. So now there's ogres, okay?
Ogres? Man, I got an ogre slaying knife. It's got a +9 against ogres.
You're not there. You're getting drunk.
Okay.
All right, I got to stop it at that point. The next line was a little sketch. All right, so yeah, so that's how. I mean, that's what the cool kids used to do. Right, Gabe? Yeah, exactly. So do you still play tabletop today?
I played it like once
You only played it once?
last year.
Oh, that was the only time you've ever done it?
I mean, we started making sheets, but at other times that I never actually got around to it.
Oh, okay. So then I'm worse than that's you. That used to be what we did to hang out. And Dad would go around to conferences. It's kind of like the anime thing today. People go to these anime conferences. It's like that, except those people used to be tabletop role playing. And yeah, because it was like awesome. It's the best thing ever. And one time I played. I was some kind of wizard guy, but I refused to use magic. So you just have these backstories, and I've always been pretty decent at backstories. I love Mr. Gonzalez. So I refused to use magic, and so in every single fight, I'm like wearing these little wizard robes, and I would pick up, just find a stick on the ground, and I would use it to try to just fight the people. And I had these fireballs and stuff, but it was against my religion. I wouldn't use the magic, even though I could. So I was not an effective party member, is what it came down to. Okay, so in any case, I know it seems funny, but so many of our modern games are based off of that. They really are. Because what did we do? You took the, these geeks sitting around a table coming up with the storyline to now somebody else wrote a storyline for a game and automates so many of those things where you're rolling the dice and a die rolls off the table and you got to crawl underneath the, and actually they have a kickback. How many of you watched the show Stranger Things? None of you have watched Stranger Things in here on Netflix? All right. You have to watch Stranger Things season 1 and season 2. Great show. The little nerdy kids in it, they play Dungeons and Dragons. So, but in any case, there's a scene in it where the dice like rolls underneath the bed or something, and they have to crawl underneath there to see what it actually said because it fell off the table, and they have to find out whether they lived or died based on what the dice said, because these are important, life-changing type of events. I think the kid was like kidnapped by like an alien monster like moments later, so they were better off what they were doing before. But in any case, when a fight starts, typically you're deciding who goes first, and then when you're actually in a fight, if you throw a punch, if you do something like throw a punch, you don't automatically hit. You would have to kind of clear somebody's armor class, and that's where the D20 gaming standard came in. So usually, if we're kind of looking at a generic version of this, somebody's armor class was something between 1 and 20. Right, that was their armor class. You actually could have armor classes higher than that with modifiers and stuff, but let's keep it simple. Your armor class is something between a 1 and a 20. Now, if I'm attacking you, your armor class is between 1 and 20. I'm attacking you. I'm going to roll a dice, and let's say I get a 17. As long as your armor class is not greater than 17, I hit. That means that my punch will land. Then next thing I'll follow up and see how hard I hit you. Because my weapon that I'm throwing, in this case it was a punch, but if I had a short sword or something, usually it has a range of damage. Maybe it does 1d4 damage. So it might do 1 damage, it might do 4 damage, or somewhere in between. So you roll a dice and find out how hard I hit. So that's the back and forth. And you can imagine that automating those things in a game is an interesting example of automation. That's kind of the point of programming and video games, I guess. All right, so we're going to have our Kool-Aid Man is going to have an armor class, and now we're going to have the ability to roll some dice and see if we clear his armor class to know whether or not we even will be able to hit him. Okay, so when this scene starts, we have our enemy script. NPC Stats is currently broken because we need to pass it an additional thing. So we're going to say that Kool-Aid Man has an armor class of 12. A little bit stronger than middle of the road, but he's hittable. It's always bad when you get one of these like armored dragons or something. They have like an armor class of like 24 or 5 or something like that. You're rolling the D20. So you need like bonuses to that in order to have a chance of hitting. It's terrible. It's when everybody dies. All right. You're going to show up for the final exam. That's why we're going to have character sheets laid out. We're going to play D&D. That'll be actually really funny. Okay. So in any case, we've adjusted our stats for our Kool-Aid Man, or for anybody who's an enemy. In this case, they're all going to be Kool-Aid Men. So even if we had 2 or 3 of them in here, they would each get the same stats. Okay, so now when Nora goes to attack, let's kick it over here real quick. So when we're in this scene and we choose to ninja, let's just say we're doing our melee attack.
Oh yeah!
All right, so she chooses to attack, so we're going to do the ninja thing. When we press enter, that's when we attempt to hit Kool-Aid Man. So behind the scenes, we're going to have to roll some dice, roll a D20. So we have to give ourselves the ability to roll a D20. Then we're going to ask did our result, whatever we rolled, did it clear Kool-Aid Man's armor class? So we need to have access to his armor class. Okay? So now, something we might do here, and we sort of were doing this before, is so Nora herself can roll a d20. So let's say she gets a 14. Okay? So I'm Nora. I get a 14. You're Kool-Aid Man. We'll probably switch it. So I got the red shirt. Okay, you're Nora. I'm Kool-Aid Man. So you roll a 14. Okay, you roll a 14. And but now you need to determine, did that hit me? Right? How do we ask that question right now? Because I know about my own stats, right? I have my little my stats variable that lives inside of Kool-Aid Man. So here's our enemy. So I have my variable here called my stats. I know that I have 10 hit points, 3 magic points, and an armor class of 12. Okay, now Nora, here's the Nora Fight controller. Maybe you roll the dice in there. You know you've rolled a 14. How do we determine whether or not your 14 is enough to hit me? Because you don't know about my stats right now, right? How do we connect those two? Because at this point, it's all a taunt, right? Nobody's actually thrown a punch. There's no colliders involved here. It's just us kind of standing around, and I think I'm gonna throw a punch. All right, actually, no, it's you. You're gonna throw a punch. Okay, you're extremely violent, which wasn't what I would have pegged, but in any case, so extremely violent, gonna throw a punch, but now you got to decide whether you can hit me. So now you know what you've thrown. You've thrown a 14. That's your attempt to hit, and I know I have a 12. But how do we determine between the two of us whether your punch hits? Because we're two separate enemies, two separate entities, and each one of us has this value. How do we connect those two? What do you think? Okay, and how do we do that? How do we have a class that knows about both? All right, so singletons might make pretty good sense here. We could certainly use our original singleton. You know, at this point, we could make an argument that maybe we have a singleton that's on a per battle basis. You know, where we just have kind of a core fight singleton, and that guy has some variables that get set at the beginning of a fight. That's probably not a bad idea. Just if we start thinking about our main scene, this guy might get kind of filled up. But I think our game is simple enough right now that we can just kind of use the same singleton for both. So what we're going to have to do here is, now we probably want to know about the game object associated with our enemy, as well as the stats associated with our enemy. Because really, that's kind of MVC, isn't it? You know, we have what our enemy looks like, you know, and the game object that is the Kool-Aid Man. And then we have his stats, and those are two separate things right now. Now we can certainly create a single data structure that has all of it inside of one. Or we can have those things. So we can come up to my NPC stats here, and we can create a variable. Why do we call this private game object, my game object, something like that. And then we'll have a setter and a getter for that guy, so that when we first start, you'll see how this works here. So in the creation of the NPC stats, we'll pass it our hit points, our magic points, our armor class, and then us. We call it the game object. Then in here we'll say this dot my game object is equal to the game object. That make sense? That way, this data structure knows about the game object that owns it. So then over here in enemy, when we first create our NPC stats, he's expecting a third parameter here. He's expecting a game object. How do I pass him the game object associated with this script? Because in this case right here, if I just say this, what is this in this context? It's a script. Yep, this is a script. So I can get the script's game object. That's Kool-Aid Man. Okay? So that's the actual Kool-Aid Man, is the game object associated with this guy. Because we might want to do things to this game object. We might want to destroy him if he's dead. We might want to, well, whatever. We need to manipulate that game object, right? So we can certainly hide it inside of the stats. So we have one data structure that holds all of the pieces. Okay, so this is kind of an MVC example where game object is our implementation of what things look like. My stats is our what do we call it? NPC stats is our implementation of the data associated with the game object. And then we've kind of glued those two together so we have an easy access to both of those pieces inside of my stats. So we have access to it, even though the two designs live separate to each other. Make sense? Okay, so we will come back to my NPC stats and let's give ourselves setters and getters for this guy. So for my game object, we're going to have a public, actually we just need a getter, right? Public game object get game object. And this will be return this dot my game object. All right, so now we can ask an instance of NPC stats to let us know about the game object that's associated with him. Okay, so now, probably in core, since we presume, since these modern, well, I say modern games, but even modern games are going to be based either on the D20 gaming system or something similar to it, some kind of default dice rolling type of background thing. So what we probably want to have is the ability to roll a certain number of dice here. And we did this with a random object, right? So we had a public random R is equal to new random. All right, and that gave us our ability to generate some rolls. And then we're going to, and this should be static. Now, we probably could even make this private, because we don't want to use our random object directly. We probably want to give ourselves kind of a helper for like roll dice with sides or something like that. So we'll have a public static int. This is going to be a function called roll dice int sides. Okay, and this guy's going to roll our dice with some number of sides that we pass in. So if we want to roll a d20, we would call roll dice with a 20 pass in there. Okay, so this is roll r dot what is it? Get. Oh, it's not r dot. It's core dot r dot. How do we get a random number out of random? Oh, that's right. It's not a. It has static methods in it, so we don't need the random there then. So we just say random dot That's seed, was it range? And this is inclusive. So we'll say range 1 to sides. Why do I keep hitting caps lock? 1 to sides, and we'll return that. So to roll the dice, we'll pass in a number of sides, and this will return random.range, which returns a value between this number, inclusive, and this number, inclusive. So if I pass in a 1 to a 20, it'll give us a number between 1 and 20, including 20 is a possibility. And we'll just return that value. All right, so now we have the ability to roll dice through our core, and that might be something that happens throughout our game, so it's good to put it up in the singleton. Now, we do need to have access to our enemy, and right now we're going to assume we have a single enemy. All right, so we'll have a public, and our enemy is actually represented as a NPC Stats object, right? So NPC Stats keeps all the information about our enemy, but also keeps track of our the enemy game object. Now, if we were being maybe better programmers about this, maybe we would have had an object called enemy, and that guy would have two things. It would have stats, and it would also have our game object. So we would get the stats through the enemy in case that enemy had something more than that. You know, they had inventory and stuff like that. So we can kind of take this maybe to the next level. And I mean, this wouldn't be a huge deal to do something like this, but it would, you know, it would change our dynamic a little bit. So if I come in here and I create, can we have a script named I don't know if we can have another script named enemy capitalized because of the way Unity handles their scripts. So I'm going to try to name this enemy like that. Yeah, see, it immediately renamed it enemy 1. Doesn't like that. So what I'm going to actually do here is I'm going to call this guy enemy container. And we'll open this. Oh, is it still named it enemy 1 in there? Oh, I just have to rename it. So there's enemy container. This guy is going to be a normal plain Jane class. He's going to keep track of 2 pieces of information. He's going to have a private NPC Stats. My stats, and he's going to have a private game object, my game object. Take away these couple of functions. We'll go ahead and we're going to say public enemy container is going to take in an NPC stats and a game object. And we'll say this dot my stats is equal to stats. This dot my game object is equal to game object. All right, and realistically, we probably can just make those guys public so we have convenient access to them. I don't think that's going to hurt anything. It will save us a little bit of time. So this guy is just a container to bring those 2 pieces together. And by doing that, we no longer need to build a my stats with the game object associated with it. So what we'll do here is we'll come into NPC Stats. This guy will take out his game object, because these are just the stats, not the dude itself. He'll also not take a game object as a parameter. So we'll dump this guy. And then we'll take out the getter for that. Okay, so now what we'll do is over here in our enemy script, when it first starts, we have our NPC stats. And what we'll actually do is I'm going to create a variable up here called private enemy container. We'll call it my container for lack of a better whatever. Enemy container. I'm going to steal this line real quick. And we'll say this dot my container is equal to a new enemy container. And this guy takes two things, some stats and takes in a game object. So I'll pass it my stats, and I'll pass it this dot game object. Okay, and it doesn't like enemy container right now. Let's see where I screwed up. Container, enemy container, that all looks fine. So I think this is going to be a Visual Studio restart. Yeah, so it's happy again. All right, so except for NPC stats, because I'm passing it the game object now and it no longer takes the game object. All right, so this will be our enemy container. Okay, so what are we going to end up doing next? We're going to end up having to determine whether the two guys can take hits from each other. So what we want to do for our homework, and I'll put it in the right class now, is we're going to have Nora roll the dice to see if she clears the armor class. If she gets an armor class of at least equal to the enemy's armor class, then she gets to actually hit him. Now, we won't actually generate the hit yet. So all we want to do is do that thing where it's working with the singleton. Okay, the singleton knows about the current enemy. Nora rolls against armor class, checks to see if her roll beats the armor class of the current enemy. If it does, maybe just print out to the console, I hit. Otherwise, print out to the console, I miss. Something like that. Make sense? All right, and I'll put this up in the correct container this time. And I will see everybody on Thursday. Thursday we'll start off by talking about the final. Then we'll get this guy into a kind of a final position because this is going to be the basis for our final, this game here. All right, I will see everybody on